Today, Ukraine called on Moscow to insist pro-Russia rebels give international teams the access that they need to the crash site. This amid fears that vital information is being taken from the crash site and will never be recovered. With me now, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN and Fox News contributor John Bolton. Good evening, Ambassador. All right, the world's a mess now. Is this administration in a position to change anything?
Well, I think the administration is in a position to change almost all of its prior mistakes, but it won't do it. That's the problem. I think the president's ideologically committed to the approach he's followed in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Asia, and I think we're in for 2.5 more years of a lack of American leadership.
So there's no hope. I mean, the world is blowing up around us, and there are so many of these significant areas that can impact us directly. I mean, do you see us in danger?
Yes, I think we are in danger. I think we could change that. For example, in the case of Ukraine, I think the president needs to appreciate that his whole approach since the famous reset button in 2009 has been wrong, and that Russia is proceeding as a strategic adversary. We're not looking for conflict, but we've got to prepare our European friends and our own disposition of political and military capability to resist this Russian aggression, and we're not doing that.
All right, and what about, let's talk about the crash site for a moment. It appears that Ukraine says the pro-Russian separatists are not allowing access to the crash site. So at the end of the day, I mean, is the international community just supposed to stand around, and will someone take charge?
Well, I think the president is standing around. If you look at his statement on Friday, he's treating this as if it's a criminal homicide investigation in the streets of New York. He wants investigators, and he actually spoke in his own remarks about this taking a month. Well, if you let that go forward, you're going to dissipate the outrage and the political support we would now have to take strong steps against the Russians. But it won't last.
And you've talked about the steps that have been taken against the Russians. You call them pinpricks.
The sanctions.
The
exactly.
Sanctions, right.
Well,
what should happen?
Look, if we want to get Putin's attention, you've got to do something very strong, because he has calibrated that Russia can withstand these very targeted, very precise sanctions. They're not deterring him. They haven't deterred him so far. So sanctions need to be something that shocks the system in Russia. For example, no Russian financial institutions, none, can participate in American financial markets. That would get their attention.
Ambassador, that makes great sense. Why would he not do that?
Because the president believes in this calibrated, academic, gradual escalation. It's called semiotic warfare. You send a little signal here, and they send a little back. This is a different world from the world of Vladimir Putin, which is a world of power. And that's why, despite setbacks galore, Putin is still calling the shots.
And do you think that our weakness or our inability right now, and make no mistake, the world perceives us as weaker.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's no question about that.
Absolutely.
Is fueling the chaos in the world? I mean, do you think people in the Middle East are saying, like ISIS and the rest of them, hey, they're not coming after us?
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the lessons of the attack on Benghazi on September the 11th, that we've arrested one person out of that attack. It's a signal that you can act against the United States with impunity. I think our adversaries and enemies have looked at this president. They see that he's weak and inattentive, and they've recalibrated their own policies accordingly, whether it's Putin in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, China in the East and South China Sea, Iran with its nuclear weapons program, or terrorists all around the world.
All right, let's talk about Netanyahu. I mean, I've always been a fan of Netanyahu. I mean, he is a guy who means what he says and says what he means. But as Israel deepens its ground offensive against, against Hamas in Gaza, what do you think that the reaction is ultimately going to be to the rest of the world? I mean, will they continue to go in there?
Well, what Israel should do is continue to act against Hamas until they have effectively destroyed it. That's the only way that Israel will ever be safe, to destroy the leadership, to destroy the infrastructure. They don't have time to do that because the Obama administration won't give them the time, nor will the Europeans. So the race here is to destroy as many missiles as they can, because those missiles supplied by Iran are intended to prevent Israel from defending itself against Iran's nuclear weapons program. This got started because of the kidnapping and murder of 3 Israeli teenagers, but the strategic issue here is much greater.
30 seconds. Southern border. What do we do?
Look, we have treated people coming in from Central America as if this were still the early 1980s, the Contras warring in Nicaragua, the war in El Salvador. That's not the way it is anymore. We need to change that. We need Mexico to enforce its borders in Central America. And you know what that requires? That requires leadership by the American president. And we're not seeing that.
And demanding it. I remember when the Mexican president came over and started preaching to us, and then our Congress stood on its feet and cheered him.
Right.
You know, I agree with you, Ambassador. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up, new information in the